Parkland Regional Library System, and I've been here for about 2.5 years. And then I'll pass it over to Sue.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Sue Human. I am the communications resource to Yellowhead Regional Library. Been doing this for a couple of years. Actually run a marketing communications agency. So we've worked with libraries for the past 20 years on and off, different libraries. So I'm happy to be here and excited for today's presentation.
So today, our presentation kind of has 3 sections to it. First, Sue and I are going to go over some theory, the 4 P's of an effective presentation. Then we're going to have some libraries and library board members talk to us about their experiences and their best practices. And then we'll open things up for questions and discussion. Okay, so the 4 P's of an effective presentation are position, prepare, practice, and present. And we'll start with position. So the first step of the process of presenting to your municipal council is going to be to understand where you fall in the position kind of in their priorities list. This is going to help you tailor your message and have more of an impact on your audience. So if your position is currently not where you desire it to be, maybe you're kind of falling towards the bottom of the priorities list, this is something that you can influence gradually over time with deliberate messaging and consistent advocacy work. So every municipality has its own goals. These are going to range from things like improving infrastructure to attracting new residents, and these goals usually pertain to the quality of life of the residents of the community. So whatever these goals are, every municipality is going to be different, and it's important that the library is aware of these goals and targets their services and budget needs to support the goals of the municipality. It's important to understand the context surrounding the council meeting that you're attending as well. So what else is on the agenda? What else is going on in the community recently? And how might the library kind of rank in that list? A good step to kind of start understanding this is to reach out to your council or your the municipality's administration to find out what their priorities are. And usually a municipality will have a strategic plan on their website available for you to download and review. Another great way to do this is by reviewing the minutes for the last couple meetings and maybe even setting yourself a calendar reminder to go in and check these meeting minutes every few months, kind of keep up to date on what the council is up to. A lot of the times nowadays as well, councils will have YouTube recordings of their meetings or like video recordings, which can be super helpful in helping you prepare, because you can see how the meeting is run, kind of the process and procedure behind it all. And you can also get to know the individual personalities. You can see who's asking questions, what kind of questions are they asking, kind of get a better idea of what to expect when you go into your presentation. So depending on the current issues that the library is facing, the asks from your council are going to vary. Are you trying to get funding for a new building, or maybe you're just asking for an inflationary adjustment to your budget? These 2 asks are very different and are really going to affect the position on the council's priority list. So it's really important to very clearly state the issues that the library is facing to kind of back up your asks. You also want to create connections between the municipality's goals and what the library is doing. This is going to help you demonstrate the library's relevance and impact. So for example, maybe the municipality has a goal to attract new young families. The library service that would correlate to that would be story time and family programs. Or another example, maybe the municipality wants to raise awareness of community services, and then the library would then offer a service where you provide welcome packages and resource materials to all patrons, kind of showing what else the community has to offer. The library, we all know this, the library is the hub of the community, and it serves many purposes for the municipality and within the municipality. The library offers so much more than just books and reading. So highlighting the stories that showcase the library as a hub will get you a long way. And competing with road maintenance. This is a very lofty challenge that we're going to have to face, but it's a realistic one. It's always a top complaint of citizens and therefore a top priority of council. It's also an expensive priority for council members. So you're going to want to position the library's message to compete with road maintenance by showing how truly great of an impact the library has. So try telling stories that show the huge impact of the library and how that affects people's lives to put that importance into perspective for council members. Okay, and next we have prepare. So when preparing for your presentation, you're going to want to remember what's your purpose of presenting this information to council and what is the outcome that you wish to see. Is this presentation just for information, kind of checking off a box, or is it part of your long-term advocacy goals? Maybe you're planning to build a new building in 5 years and you kind of want to build up that relationship with council. So yeah, this is going to determine the information that you put in your presentation. So if your goal, for example, we'll run with this one, is to get funding for a new building, you're going to want to demonstrate the popularity of your current space, maybe some ways that it's not currently meeting the needs of the community, and how a new building could have all of these positive impacts on the quality of life of the residents of the municipality. Knowing your audience is crucial in any communication. If you're a Parkland person here, you're going to know because I constantly harp on it. But it's nice because council is a relatively small audience, so you can kind of hyperfixate on this audience and learn as much as you can about these people. If you can, like, maybe you find out that one council member has school-age children, so you can tailor a message to them, maybe about the library's homework help program. Or maybe, you know, a council member has been campaigning a specific issue and you can kind of try to figure out how the library can fit in to support that individual goal. It's really important to understand how the meeting will be run and the general protocol of the meeting. This includes making sure you stick to your time limit. This is really important. Councils are very busy and it's important to respect their time. You don't need to go through your budget line by line. You're going to provide a copy of the full budget to all the meeting attendees, so they don't need to kind of go through every single number. You're only going to go over key budget lines, and like if you're asking for an increase here or there, you're going to want to touch on those ones. And then just be prepared, know your budget well, so that if people have questions, you can kind of dive deeper into those questions. And then make sure again to link any increases to council's goals. So using the previous year's annual report statistics and your current year's actions, you can create a takeaway document or handout that outline the highlights of library service and how these services pertain to the goals of the library's plan of service and the municipality's strategic goals. So some examples of things that you can include in this handout are library use statistics like circulation, Wi-Fi usage, computer usage, program attendance, visits to your library. You can include impact statements, patron testimonials, stories, a summary of your plan of service, and maybe some examples of community partnerships and contributions. Again, you don't want to include every statistic in this handout. If you go over numbers for too long, you're going to lose the interest of your audience. So pick a few key numbers and clearly communicate how these relate to municipal goals to have the most impact. And if there are questions asked that you do not have the answers to, that's completely fine. You're only human. But make sure you send a follow-up email with the answers to those questions. It's great to just send out an email after your presentation. Hey, here are the answers to your questions. Here is my handout with kind of the key messages on it. And thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to connect with you guys in the future. That's a best practice that we definitely would recommend. Okay, and I will pass it off to Sue to cover the practice.
Thanks, Hailey. Super important points that you covered there, just around assembling the content. I think sometimes we approach things from our own perspective of the things we want to say, but it's really important to be aware of the things that council needs to hear. So, preparing is really critical for these kinds of presentations. And on that note, practicing your presentation will help you be smooth and confident in your delivery. So I like to memorize the opening of my presentations, the first couple of lines, because if you have any, startup jitters, or you're not sure of how to, launch into your presentation, if you memorize the first couple of things you want to say, then the rest will just flow. So it's just an easy tip for kind of relaxing the nerves if you're a bit nervous about presenting in front of council, or particularly if you've not done it before. And you're not sure of, the lay of the land. Just starting by memorizing your opening can go a long way to putting your, put yourself at ease. When we practice presentations, and when I work with clients, and I've worked with many municipalities with their administrators on this very topic, I've helped municipal administrators learn how to present to their councils if it's their first time. And one of the things that I always make them do is go through their presentation and say it out loud. If you are reading from a document, if you have not learned how to say the words out loud, read the lines out loud, then you may stumble over certain phrases or pronunciation, or things just don't sound natural to you. So that's a time when you can adjust your script and make it sound more like a conversation and less like you're reading from an actual script. So say it out loud. Make sure you practice the pronunciation of various words, terms, councillor names. There's nothing more awkward than mispronouncing the mayor's name or a councillor's name when responding to their questions. So make sure you understand who your councillors are and how to pronounce their names. And you're going to need to refer to them in a very formal sense. This is not a hi Bill, hi Bob kind of situation. This is a Councillor Smith, Mr. Smith is how you refer to people during a council meeting. It's not a first name basis kind of situation. And I think if you can elevate that, it really makes you stand out from people who might come in and say, well, Bob, I was just talking to you yesterday at the grocery store, and we chatted about this. This is a more formal setting, or tends to be a more formal setting. So you're going to want to be able to be smooth in that presentation. Watch your pace. Sometimes if we get very excited, we talk really fast and people can't follow us. Or sometimes we drag out the word until people are agitated and they want to literally pull the words out of your throat. So just watch your pace. Make sure that you are talking at a pace that is a conversational level, not too fast, but then not too slow either, because you want to maintain your audience's interest in what it is you're saying. If you're doing either of those things, too fast or too slow, people tend to drift off. And so you don't want that. You want their full attention. And on that note, watch for nonverbal cues with your council members. If they are looking at their phones, or they're looking at a screen, or they're flipping pages, or they're sitting back with their arms crossed, or they're puffing a lot, it means that they're impatient and that you've lost them. So when you see those kind of clues, switch gears. If you're talking ad nauseum about the minutia of numbers, clearly that's a signal they don't want that from you. Move on. If you are telling a story, maybe one story is sufficient. 3 or 4 stories starts to get, okay, we get the point, move on. So watch those nonverbal cues and make sure you're able to adjust on the fly. Don't take it personally. It's not about you. You might be item number 12 on an agenda coming late in the day, which is kind of death for anybody who has to present to council late in the day. So you just want to just be aware of their perspective and what their day has been like. And toward that, and I would say if you can sit through the council meeting prior to your presentation, you will have a better sense of how councillors are interacting with administration or any other presenters that they have in terms of their level of patience, their level of understanding, their willingness to go along a story line, that sort of thing, and be attuned to that and take your cues from that so that you're not losing your audience. Next slide, please, Hailey. Yeah, so when you're presenting, make sure that you have your key messages. And again, this goes back to the earlier slide around prepare and understanding your purpose. If you're there to ask for money, make sure that your key messages support that ask. If you're there and you're not seeking a budget increase, you're just having to come because you're one of the areas that has to present in front of council for their budget, that's okay too. Like, it doesn't have to be and it shouldn't be any kind of confrontational kind of situation. Your key messages should support what it is that you do, why you need the funding that you're asking for, even if it's a status quo. And again, as Hailey mentioned, really important to link back to the municipal goals. So if the municipality has a goal around economic development, perhaps they're trying to attract business and residents to the municipality. You can demonstrate how libraries are often seen as one of the key factors that a business will look at when deciding where to locate. Because we know that's true. The research supports that libraries are one of the key quality of life institutions that businesses will look to see if there's one in the community, because that's important to their employees. So stay really clear on your key messages. I'll see if I can find the research. I've known it from a number of years ago. Let me, thank you, Alyssa. I will see if I can find that. Yeah, you bet. Use plain language and clear language. We have lots of library jargon and acronyms that you all understand on a daily basis, but remember that your counselors, you are just one of maybe 5 or 6 business units that are coming to talk to them about budget. So they've got to know about snow plows, and they've got to know about, dust control maintenance, and they've got to know about parks. So you're just one of many, and the easier you make it for counselors to relate to what you're saying, to making it clear in plain language, no jargon or acronyms, the better. Because it's, again, if you're lucky enough to go first, yay. But most often libraries are not the first item on the agenda when it comes to budget. So you'll have to think again what council has been through in that day, and their heads are full of, all kinds of statistics and numbers. So make it easy for them. Speak in plain language, be clear, and offer a logical sequence to your presentation. So things should flow from A to B to C to D. Sometimes when we are nervous, or if we've not prepared properly, we can bounce all over the place like a rubber ball. So, you start off talking about budget. I wanted to tell you a story about something that happened at the library yesterday. But then, circulation numbers, they're really through the roof. But our van driver had a problem. His it broke down. You really need to stop and make sure that you're presenting information in a logical sequence that builds to a crescendo. What you want to do is lay the foundation for your presentation. You want to talk about the library use, the value that it brings to the community, and then you want to build up to the facts and figures and numbers kind of situation. So you want to be able to give it that logical approach that says, when I ask for a $2 per capita increase on the grant, you will have already laid the foundation for that. in your opening comments. So make sure it makes sense. It's a logical sequence. And one of the best ways to do that whilst you're practicing your presentation out loud is to present to somebody who knows nothing about what you do. And then ask them, did that all make sense? Was that presented in a way that made sense to you? Because you can get really great feedback from people who don't know anything about libraries or how they're funded, or what the markers of success look like. I think oftentimes we end up presenting to each other, and you all know too much. You need to present to people who don't know anything about this topic. Don't read your slides. So there's nothing worse than having, the actual script line by line on a slide. You want to be able to have some bullet points like we have here, sort of key tips, but then expand on them. If people have to read along, again, they will read ahead while you're talking about the first bullet point, and they will have missed everything you said. Because again, research shows that the brain cannot do two things at once. It can only do one thing at a time. This is why we have distracted driving laws. You cannot do two things at once. So if you pop up a slide and it's got a lot of text on it, people are going to be reading that while you're talking, and they will have missed your first 2 points. And usually we put the most important things first. This is human nature. So if your most important information is at the front and people are ignoring you because they're reading a slide, they're going to miss your most important message. And then end with a call to action, remembering your purpose for being there. So if you're there at budget time and it's about the money, you need to end with a strong call to action that says, I hope that I have demonstrated the value of the library in our community and to the people that we serve. I'm looking for your support for our budget request item this year. Thank you. I'll take any questions. So you want to end with that very strong call to action to make sure that people are reminded why you were there, because you may have gone down a road or two during your presentation and they've forgotten why are we here. So thank you. Hailey? Yes, thank you. I really do find that practicing in front of non-library people really will help you hone your message, because you all know too much. So if I was to say, something about Polaris, you'd all go, oh yeah, Polaris. If I was to say that to a non-library person, they go, like the star? What are we talking about? So yeah, it's really important. When you're answering questions, the first thing you can do goes back to that preparation. Make sure you can anticipate what they're going to ask you. So, think about the context of your municipality. Think about the other pressures that are facing the municipality in terms of funding requests. What kinds of things can you anticipate that your council is going to ask you? And then you also need to learn how to counter objections. And here, I like to liken it to, if you've ever been in a high pressure sales environment where there's a salesperson following you around, typically like a car dealership, or used to be some furniture stores that I won't name, that would follow you around and, try and get you to buy stuff. They would have an answer for everything you said. If you said, no, I'm just looking today, their answer would be, well, let me help you find what you're looking for, is kind of thing. And so you have to learn how to do that. You have to learn how to be salespeople for your own library. So anticipate their questions, but also make sure you can counter any objections that they may have about what it is you're asking for. And we've popped in this little bullet about the provincial increase, because we have heard from some libraries that are concerned that with the recent increase in provincial funding, that some municipalities may be looking to claw back. We don't know that that's true. We've heard some concern that that might be true. So two things. Firstly, we did some work. Parkland and Yellowhead did some work together with the systems on an advocacy campaign earlier this year. You can always fall back on that messaging. It had messaging about how libraries support economic development, health, education, environment. Environment, that's a really cool one, because libraries are the original recycling facility, right? It's just materials go round and round and round. And then a source of credible information. So you can use some of those messages that are available. And either Hailey or myself, we can send you the document that we prepared for that, for the provincial election campaign earlier this year that has that information. And then I believe that Leslie's going to talk about it later on when she talks about Olds Public Library and their experience with budget and so forth. Yes, please send the document. All right. Yeah, get in touch. We will do that. So there's going to be more information about how to counter those objections to your budget. Make sure you have your facts and figures at hand, but again, you don't have to go through all of them. This is like a back pocket situation where if someone says, yes, and I'm interested in how many children took out books on giraffes in the month of July, you know, have statistics at hand that you can say, well, thank you, counselor, for asking that very important question. I happen to know that 10 children took out books on giraffes in the month of July. You don't want to include that in your presentation because then your presentation gets too long. But what you want to do is when you're anticipating the kinds of questions or information that your council will want, make sure you have your facts and figures ready at hand. It helps with your credibility and your trust level with council if you're able to answer their questions in the moment. Of course, if you don't have the answer to a question, that's fine. You can say, I will get back to you with that. And then as Hailey pointed out earlier, you know, it's a good way to send a follow-up email saying, I have the answer to your question. And oh, by the way, here's 3 other things I want you to know. And then tell stories. And Hailey's done a good job of describing the kinds of stories that you folks can tell to help illustrate the impact that libraries have on your community, as well as the impact that libraries have on the municipality's goals for the community. So those are some tips on being prepared to answer questions.
Okay, so now we will jump into some stories, some library experience. First, I'll invite Leslie and Shauna to give some insight on the process that they follow at Olds Library. Shauna is the Olds board chair, and she has been on the board for 8 years. And Leslie is the library manager who has been at Olds Library for over 20 years. And she actually was a council member at one time, so she's got some really unique and helpful insight for us. So I will pass it over to them.
All righty, well, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming out today. What we wanted to cover, we wanted to make sure that your board themselves understand what this budgeting actually even is, because they're the people that are going to be out in the community chatting up with those counselors at the neighborhood barbecue and that kind of thing. So your board, the whole board, needs to understand what that budget means and how it ties into what the library needs. So we actually do spend quite a bit of time on board training and preparation. We talk about a lot of times your your board members are not financially savvy. They don't necessarily come from banks. We're lucky we have one of current members is actually works for a bank, but I did not know anything about financial statements and strategic plans and all those things. So it was nice to have that training to understand what all that jargon, as Sue was referring to, what all that jargon means. So it's nice to have that kind of information. And then we also, people in the community, including myself before I became a board member, had no idea how libraries got their money. So in order for us as board members to be able to communicate where we need money and what we need money for, we need to understand where that money is coming from. So in our particular instance, we get money from several different places, as you can see from this diagram here. So we need to understand as board members where that money is coming from and how much it is. We also need to understand the historical numbers, how much we used to get versus how much we're getting now. So that 5% thing that we were talking about, did we always get 5%, that kind of thing, and understanding how the budget ties into our strategic plan. So it's really, really important to, as board members, to understand that we want to have a plan of creating early readers. Well, then how are we going to pay for that kind of thing? Then the other thing the board needs to understand is the responsibilities. Who does it? Is it Leslie doing the budget? Is it me, the board chair, doing the budget? Is it our treasurer? Who does it, and what kinds of things are they going to be doing?
So then in olds, our process, we thought we'd talk a little bit about what our process looks like, because it's just as important. The preparation of your budget is just as important as your presentation, because as Shauna said, if the entire board and staff and everyone understands maybe why you need that increase, then you're going to be able to articulate that when you get asked questions, as Sue and Hailey pointed out, for being prepared. So in our process, usually our draft is done by the library manager, myself, the first draft. And really that's an opportunity to hash out what service is going to look like in the next year. It's really, I mean, if you take anything out of this slide, I would say the most important thing is connect with your town administration. It's fine to do the presentation to council, but it is really important for library managers to be in contact with the town administration. Usually you will be under a specific department. In our town, it is community services. Every town is a little bit different, but in most towns it's community services. So I talk with the community services director. We talk about what the library is doing. I usually reach out to him before I do our budget draft and just get an idea where council might be leaning. I always kind of say, I know you haven't decided yet, but what might we be looking at as far as a COLA increase? Would we be looking at that? But if they are on your side and you avoid the us versus them, the town won't give us money, so we can't do this, is a bad situation to get into. So you want to try and forge those relationships, because then when council is discussing that and you're presenting it, the administration is on your side and can say, yes, we can get behind that. That fits within our budget, because ultimately your money comes out of community services or one of those departments. So they have to justify it within their budget as well. You want to make sure that the staff is involved in that process. If you're doing programming, what does programming look like for the next year? Are there increases to different programs that you're going to want to do? Are there increased costs? Because again, your staff is the frontline people. They're going to talk to the community. If you are going to have to justify to the community and or council what an increase might look like, they'll be able to articulate that and talk to the public about that without going, I don't know, the board figures that out. Of course, the library manager is going to prepare the projections for the year, look at the accounting. They're going to present those historical numbers that Shauna talked about. What have we spent? What does our budget look like? What are our actuals for the last 3 years? And then consider if there's any service levels that you want to increase or decrease. Once that is done, then of course we go on to, we have a finance committee on our board, and then that gives us an opportunity to talk about the budget draft in a smaller group setting and really hash out those questions. If your board is presenting to the council, it's usually someone from that, either the treasurer or the board chair, that is going to be doing that presentation alongside the library manager. Sometimes the library manager is more involved in that, but those people are the ones that are going to have to answer those questions. So they need to be really intimate with the budget and understand where those numbers are, especially if you're going to be asking for increases. And then they're going to present it to the board, which is good practice for presenting to council. So then they will then bring that forward to the full board and come up with a third draft and discuss where that fits within the strategic plan. I'll go over, I guess I'll reiterate the strategic plan goals. Your goals should be aligned with your budget. So if your strategic plan, if you're budgeting to your strategic plan, and then that plan also aligns with the town's kind of goals moving forward, then you're going to have more success. But it's also really important to reiterate to council when you're presenting to them that your strategic plan was built on focus groups and surveys that you asked the community. So this isn't just your idea of what the library should do. This is the community's idea of what the library, what they need from the library. And in order to fulfill those needs, you need X, Y, Z. So go on to the next slide. So a few of the things that might come up when you're kind of creating your budget or talking to council about your expenses and revenues, I guess first and foremost, you need to figure out what you need to run the library. A lot of us start with the revenue and we say, okay, we have this much money, what can we spend that on? And then you try and figure out how to live within that. But if you're going to have a true understanding of what your budget is going to represent in the community, then you should start with your expenses and say, in order to complete these tasks or have these services or be open this many hours, we need this much money. And then you figure out where that revenue is going to come from. So for example, with staffing, when you're looking at staffing levels and you might want to increase staffing grid wages and or staffing implement, you're going to want to compare with organizations, in my opinion, our opinion, I guess, with organizations in your own community, not necessarily other libraries or, for example, as olds, we're not going to necessarily compare with Edmonton Public Library, that's a city library branch. So compare with other libraries of similar size, but specifically in your community, even though we're a similar size to another community in our region, they might have a different cost of living. So if I compare with Town of Olds employees that have similar job descriptions, I'm going to have more success in explaining that because they've already talked about that at their own level. Our staff deserve this. So your staff that are equivalent probably deserve the same. Are you going to be implying, so when you're talking about materials and things that you're giving to the public, don't forget to think about inflation numbers and how does that inflation, I mean, inflation is a big thing in the news. Your council is going to understand inflation as a relevant thing that they need to also consider. So knowing that you're applying inflation to some of those numbers can be really helpful in your presentation. Programming is the main way that you achieve your strategic plan. So again, going back to your strategic plan. And then of course, your admin expenses are things that power, gas, you can't get grants for. So those are things that aren't going to change and you have no control over. And hopefully you can let the town know that, you know, if they want a library in their community, these are the bare minimum things that we need to fund. You have to have staff, you have to have gas, you have to have power, all of those things. So those are the things that at the bare minimum, they should be helping fund if they want to have a library in their thing. And then you go to revenue. I won't talk a lot about that because Sean is going to talk more about like, what do you do if you don't get that revenue? We're going to assume you're all going to get the money you need and that is going to be wonderful. Doesn't always happen that way, but start with the things that you can't change. We can't get more from the province every year. We don't get the opportunity to present to the province every year. So we can just advocate regularly. That's a number that's going to go in there and you can't change. And then make sure you're setting realistic funding goals. And, you know, for example, it's not fair to ask a board or group of friends of the library to say they're going to raise $50,000. I mean, in some communities, maybe that's normal, but in smaller towns, $50,000 by a volunteer organization is going to be hard to reach. So you need to be realistic in setting those goals and be able to, again, let council know what is realistic. They don't want to see zero in that budget line, but I think in most cases, as long as you're attempting to balance the budget a little bit by doing some of your own work, then they'll hopefully be happy. Grants, of course, are always a revenue source, but they're not guaranteed. So be careful about saying you're going to fund everything with grants, because what happens if you don't get those grants is the same as what happens if you don't get the money from council. So that is kind of how we approach prepping and making sure everybody is on board with the budget. And then Sean is going to talk a little bit about what happens if you don't get that money.
So yes, so what if your council is asking questions about, well, you just got 5%, we don't want to give you 5%, or, you know, you just need to advocate for yourself. So how can you demonstrate how that much that might hurt your library? So what we can do is we can talk about where will you cut some of those things. So you want those things, it's really hard to do, but you want some of those things to be very visible things. So that could be hours in the library. So we can't be open Sundays anymore because we can't fund that staff member. It hurts a little bit, but it will demonstrate to the public, the people that are working five days a week can't get to the library during the week. So if your hours are only 9 to 5 kind of thing. So some of those things demonstrating that you can't afford the staff members to staff that. You can also cut back on some of the programs, or you can demonstrate that maybe we have this program that can only run for 10 kids, but we have a waiting list of 30. So demonstrating some of those things to the council members to show them, okay, if we don't have this money, then this is what's going to happen. And then you also have people in the community asking questions that way. If there's 30 people on that list and they hear that there's 10 people, only 10 people allowed, they'll be like, well, why don't you have the capacity for 40 people? And you can just explain to them what's happening. So then the community members then start advocating for the library because they need more hours, they need more services. One of the things that is happening a lot in Alberta right now, I just read recently that Alberta in all of Canada has actually received a ton more new Canadians. So suddenly we have, we maybe have 5% from the province, but your town has now received 200 more international people into the community, and they are definitely people that use the library. So you can demonstrate that we need more ESL services, we need more second language books, lots and lots of programs for them, that kind of thing. They're the kind of people that are going to be using those things, and we want them to come here to Canada to work with us and be here. So how are we going to fund that? So you can talk to the town about that, show some of those statistics. Then you also want to make sure that you update the board of the progress that's happening with your budget. Sometimes things get a little out of control, off the rails. So again, suddenly your electric bill has gone up. You got to bring that back to the board members and talk to them about, okay, what can we change? Do we have to cancel some of our programs and stuff because the electric bill was so high and that sort of thing. So you want to plan for some of those things, but there's stuff that just happens. So you need to report that back to the board. And yes, you want to make sure that you have data to report to the community, again, to help with that whole advocacy. If your board knows what's going on, they can be answering those questions in the community when they go to those community nights, when they're at the Legion, like we were last night. We can talk about all the programs that the library is offering, and then they can be our advocates in the community when they hear that suddenly that program at the library isn't running anymore, and they might be asking those questions to members of council to say, well, how come the town isn't helping make sure that this program is running for seniors, right? So getting out there in the community and helping your board understand that where the money is coming from and where it's not coming from is the best way to advocate for your library.
Yeah. And I'll just add one more thing before we go through that slide, just in regards to the money from the province that everyone's worried about things being clawed back as well, which Shauna touched on a little bit. I think that one thing libraries that we need to make councils or community members understand is that we're pretty frugal people. And because we want the library to be a success, we just make it work. But they don't understand that we've been operating at a deficit in service because of that. And we're not able to, as Shauna said, you might have 30 people on the list for programming. You're still running that Lego program. But now that you've gotten some extra money from the province, we've been able to up these levels, but we're still at a deficit. And that's why we're looking for that funding. So you still have to do your proposals. You still have to understand why you need more money from the town. And if you can explain that, then you shouldn't have any problem keeping the money from the town and the province. Of course, every council is different. So next slide. the last thing that we wanted to touch on is just, this is not a new thing. I didn't invent this. This has been around for a while. You guys have all probably seen it, but we use our cost benefit analysis and we present this to the board. And when I do presentations to council, I sometimes will bring this up as well. Counselors are often very bottom line. What's the bottom line? How is my return on investment measured financially, and what are you giving back to the community? It's great. You should share the stories. They're so happy to know that, you know, you helped 500 readers become lifelong readers, but that's hard to measure. However, if you can say, for every dollar that was invested in the library, $4.94 was brought back to the community, then they understand that. They go, oh, well, that's actually a really good return on my investment. So this calculator, this is just a spreadsheet that I put together based on other people's. I'm happy to share it if people want to reach out to me. But basically, it just takes the statistics that you typically gather. So adult books borrowed in 2022 for us was a little over 29,000, an average value of $17 per book. If a patron had to buy all of those books, it would have cost our community $502,486. So you add up all those statistics and all of the money that your community saved. So for us in 2022, $2.5 million in savings just by using the library instead of having to go out and buy all those things yourself, which then can be invested in economic development, make people able to handle inflation a little bit better, those types of things that you can reiterate once you're talking about cost savings. And then of course, it's just simple math when you take your total revenue divided by community savings, and that gives you how much money goes back into the community. So we find this to be very beneficial for board members, and counselors really respond to that bottom line number and are quite impressed to know that. So
it's like how your patrons get excited when they see how much money they've saved.
Yeah.
Because they borrowed 20 books, they've saved $340.
yeah. Yes, I'm happy to share it. Just send me an email.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, yes, I see in the chat, we've got lots of people requesting it, so I've included Leslie's email in the chat for anybody that would like to reach out and get connected with this document. I'll open up the floor for questions. Actually, I guess you guys can't speak, so type it in the chat, and any questions for Leslie and Shauna or for me and Sue. We'll take a quick little questions break. Okay.
We're amazing presenters. There's no questions.
You just answered it all. Okay, Paula is asking, how did you get the averages?
How do the average cost of things? I just looked it up on the internet. There's lots of resources out there of what the average cost is. And of course, you can easily just go online and do your own averages if you want. Here's how much books cost. And you can I usually use the retail numbers, not the money that we pay, because of course we get discounts and you're doing their savings, not your savings. So if they had to buy it, they would have charged $17, that type of thing.
Sue?
There was a previous
Yeah,
question.
Yeah, and Leslie, I think your valuations, just as I look at it, seem quite reasonable. So, but certainly people can, you can make those adjustments yourself if you want to put in different numbers. I wanted to respond to Alyssa's question about her county reeve, who doesn't think the library should do anything except facilitate the collection. I'm going to guess this person does not use the library. Because that, in my mind, that's a typical reaction from somebody who doesn't use the programming and therefore does not value the programming. I guess the answer would be that, what I would suggest is simply saying that, I respect that you may not see value in children's story time or seniors programming, but we know that the community does, and just try and demonstrate that there's value beyond an individual's personal experience. So if that county reeve doesn't use the library or doesn't think that you should have programs or other kinds of services, you know, I think that that's might be one approach, is just to talk about everybody else who sees value in it. And that's demonstrated by things like wait lists or requests for different programming and so forth. But I'd love to hear from Leslie, Shauna, Gloria, or Sandy on this question.
Yeah, demonstrating how many people have come in to use the computers, for example, or had to do exams and that sort of, those sort of services that don't normally sit anywhere else, right? They're very unique for a library, and a lot of people don't even know that the library provides those things. Resume help, that sort of thing. How many young adults were able to get resume help? So having actual numbers, a lot of times, maybe the people that aren't like him, for example, can only see the numbers of books, right? So maybe showing him some of those numbers and some of those cost savings with those programs, the fact that that many kids were able to take that many programs, that sort of thing, number wise, maybe that would help with that person.
Well, and I think that it's, again, goes back to what you guys were talking about, tell stories. He, again, isn't seeing the value because he doesn't use that service, but there are people that live in the county that do use that service. And so he needs to hear from his constituents that they use the library and find it valuable for more than just checking out books. And so if you can find some people within the county where he is, I guess, presiding over what his little district is, and if you can find some people within that can even just have a conversation. It doesn't have to be an aggressive letter writing campaign or anything like that, but perhaps you can just have a conversation, say, hey, Shauna, do you mind just like talking to your reeve about the fact that you come to story time every week and that you find that valuable? It would really be helpful to us.
Yeah, and I think what you don't want to do is you don't want to have that adversarial, you know, the challenge with letter writing campaigns is that they immediately set up conflict. So while they may have a place, it wouldn't be the first thing I would do, simply because you've then erased any potential for a discussion. But I think the other thing you can do is ask the reeve, you know, do you have children in school? If they don't have children in school, ask them, but do you still support the principle of education for children? Like, you know what I mean? Like my example doesn't always fit with a lot of smaller municipalities, but I don't ride the bus, but I think having a public transit system is really important. So sometimes you can compare things. Gloria, Sandy, do you have something to add to this?
My favorite thing would be to get the reeve to come in and read a story at story time. As soon as he's done that, he will understand how important it is. Because I think if they come in, can you come in and read your favorite story? And they see all the kids and what's happening, that's a really good advocate.
I agree. We like to use stories to tell pictures quite a bit as well. We had an opportunity to contribute some pictures to our county library board to use in their presentation. And so we found a bunch of pictures that illustrated very well, you know, the number of people that were coming to programs. We found actually in the pictures, there was one of the counselor's daughters had come to a story time and brought his granddaughter. So we included that picture so that, you know, there was some, that you know, somebody would recognize that. That worked out great. And lots of times when we use county resources to do programs, gardening classes, their horticulturist comes, we make sure we include those pictures as well. And that seems to help.
Excellent. There's a follow-up comment that this particular reeve that they were having an issue with is also of the opinion that most services that are being offered should be other organizations' responsibilities. That's a tough one to respond to. Like, the library does so much. How would you guys kind of respond to that issue with that particular counselor?
Someone else like who?
Well, there's lots of like community
Neighborhood
learning,
place.
Alberta, like adult learning councils and things like that, because we get that comment sometimes as well. I mean, they're good partners, and I think it is important to worry about duplication of services. So if you're offering the same types of programs that another community organization is offering, perhaps you need to do more partnering with that community organization, get them to offer their program in your library, and then you're seen as that, again, community hub that is there. And you know what, we talked about this in our kind of preamble before the presentation began. You will never be able to convince the people that are against the library to be for the library, as well as there's no sense in spending your time preaching to the converted. So focus on the ones that are like on the fence or you're not sure, because those are the ones that are going to, every counselor only has one vote. So.
Okay, I have another question here coming in from Joy. How do boards and libraries best work with funding levels based on a town cycle? For example, our council has an increase for our library that is held consistent for the duration of the budget cycle of the town, which is 4 years. The percentage increase is nice and steady, but low. It may work for the duration of the 4-year cycle, but will need a substantial boost in their next cycle. So for this, I would recommend making an advocacy plan that kind of goes over the 4 years that you're kind of have that set increase for, to build your case over time, build your relationships over time, so that when the 4 years is up, you already have put in a lot of the work and it's going to be a lot easier to ask for that extra increase. Does anyone else have anything to add on that? Okay. Any other questions? I think we've had some great conversation. Excited to keep it going. If nothing else comes in, then I will introduce our next presenters, which is Gloria and Sandy. So Gloria has been the library manager for the Mayerthorpe Library for 13 years, and she also served as a council member at one time. So great perspective to have here today. And then we have Sandy, who has been on council for 8 years and has also been the director of the Yellowhead board and a board member for Yellowhead for 9 years. So welcome, Gloria and Sandy. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much for inviting us. So I thought I'd start by telling you a little bit about a book I'm reading, because, you know, I love to talk about books any opportunity I get. So I'm reading The Covenant of Water right now by Abraham Verghese. And I found really something that really struck me in that book. There is a gentleman that moves to this small community in India, and nobody can even remember his name anymore. They call him the Uplift Master, because he has worked so hard to bring great things to his community, get infrastructure, all kinds of things. And he has a young protege, and his advice to his protege is, you need to understand money. First of all, before you can get it, you need to understand it. And what you need to understand is nobody wants to give it away. So his advice is, when you're writing a letter or request for funding, make sure you CC people that are higher up the chain, because otherwise the clerk that opens that letter might have a, you know, a brother-in-law that builds bridges, and he'd rather see the funding get directed to his own community. So make sure you CC people. So that was interesting, but I would argue that maybe there's some other things that might be more important. And for us, it has been building goodwill, telling some compelling stories, and communication. So we try to notice things that the town are doing. So we have a newsletter that we send out to quite a few people by email every month. So if we notice that the town have got a job vacancy, or maybe they've got a survey that they're doing, or, you know, there's something that they've done that we think people should recognize and commend the town for, we include it in our newsletter, or we share their posts on Facebook. They built a sidewalk to the library. We want to make sure everybody knew about it, so we stick those things in there. And we think that that's, you know, helping over time, those little things. We try to do more sharing and you know, goodwill than asks. So we also want to, you know, put it out there that we're both serving our community. We're both doing the same thing. So let's do it together. And then on top of that as well, we try to include our community too. So organizations, businesses, we share their posts and the things that they're doing. And we think that that gets back to our council as well. So I wanted to also talk about communication and confess that I have spammed our counselors. So so when there's been an election and there's new counselors come on, we have just added them to our newsletter list. And in our newsletter, we put a little disclaimer that says, if you don't know why you've received this newsletter, it might be because you've just been elected. So congratulations. And we've elected to send you our newsletter. So and nobody has opted out. So we're happy about that. So we really do try to yeah, I don't know. We try to be a little bit funny about it and have some goodwill and some camaraderie with our counselors.
And during election, when we have the forum with the counselors talking about what they're going to do, the library is always present to ask questions about how do you feel about the library? What are you going to do, you know, to get an idea about how counselors feel.
For sure.
Which is a good one.
For sure. So we do all of the work with the, you know, getting our budget ready and all those things. And then it comes to our presentation. And we'd like to talk a little bit about that today. So we traditionally had, I had kind of sat back and because, you know, elected people should talk to elected people. So I sat back and I was the support person, and my board chair has always done the talking. I answer questions. I provide all those handouts and things. And then last year, Sue had just done a webinar just before we did our presentation, and I watched that quite a few times too. It was wonderful. Thank you. We didn't have time to use the slides, which I think you might talk about later, which would be great. But we did gather stories. So I kind of started out by doing a bit of a list of all the things that we had done in the past year so that I would have it straight in my mind. So, and then from there, I thought about the people that it affected. And I wrote a speech based on those stories. So my board chair had spoken before me, and her speech, she's an accountant. We're blessed with an accountant as a board chair. So she did a great job of going through the numbers, you know, touching on the economy, all the things, you know. And so I didn't feel the need to rehash that. So I really talked about the stories. And in the past, our board chairs had, you know, mentioned a story, but really nobody knows your library like your staff, like you and your staff. So it was more compelling, I think, coming from me this time, maybe.
It was.
So it was a lot of stories. Sue, I know you told me to, or you told all of us to memorize your first line, which I did, and that try not to speak from, you know, try not to read word for word. But I gotta confess, I really did, because I'm not a speaker. And so I did read word for word. I practiced it lots.
Yes.
And it turned out okay. So I did make no money, a mention of money until the end. I kind of, yeah, went through a lot of, you know, just talked about our patrons. And then at the end, I also provided some information about how the library board support the town with their initiatives. So I had gone through their strategic plan. I had, you know, put in points, how the library has helped you already achieve this. And I put it in a handout and I gave it to them at the end. I touched on it in my speech and reminded them at the end that we're their library, we're a pretty good one. We're both working together for the community. And then I asked them to support us, you know, by supporting our programs, let people know about them, share our posts, and please increase our funding. And that was that.
It was an amazing change. Gloria's had to do some repair to relationships over the last 9 years that I've known her. Council did not have, we had sort of a butting of heads when I first arrived, and that she's been very patient and very patient. And when she started sharing the stories, the counselors did not realize how many things the library did. Some of her stories were very heart-wrenching about people who had come to the community and didn't speak English, and they were working with those people. One person couldn't see his parents. He was from the Ukraine, so they set up a weekly program on the computer so he could talk to his mother. There was just all kinds of stories that she should have told many of them on this, because they were just incredible. And I know all of the libraries are doing those kinds of things, but counselors did not realize what the library did, especially through the pandemic. There were a lot of stories about that as well, and how their doors stayed open. And at the end of it, after the delegation left, the council chamber talked for probably a good hour about how compelling this presentation was. And to the point where our mayor actually decided to get a meeting with the minister. We were having our caucus at the Westin, and Rebecca Schultz was there, and she managed to get a meeting with her. And she was the Minister of Municipalities at that time. And the mayor talked only about library and what we needed for the library. And do you know that we took Gloria's letter, she read the letter of all the things they were doing. And even though the 5% was there, the library needed more money than that. And that was the only thing she talked about to the Minister of Municipalities was library. I was absolutely thrilled. I was with her as well. And interesting enough, now, of course, the minister has changed. It's now Rick McIver, but hopefully she's passed on some of that information. Interesting enough, at the end of our meeting, she said, I love libraries. As a matter of fact, my daughter is at a program right now at the Edmonton Library while I'm here at the Westin. And that was a really wonderful end of our meeting, because you realize that this young woman, this young girl or woman that is Rebecca Schultz, really was a supporter of libraries, and she realized the value having her daughter at a program that morning. I think that the other thing we learned was that we want the library to give us their budget before we do budget. It used to be that we would do our budget, and this is what we'll give the library, and then we would get their budget. And of course, we didn't increase anything. So now we're going to have it ahead of time where we can talk about it. And I have to say, there used to be some negative talk about library in our council chamber. There is not anymore. It's all a positive. So what Gloria did was amazing. You were amazing. She did, and it was a real sharing rather than asking and complaining. It was a sharing of, this is what we do. These are the programs we offer, and we can use your support to keep them going. And I think that was the real crux of why things changed, rather than you don't give us enough. We don't have, we're always hearing that from everybody. Everybody wants money. But when you see the value, I love the chart that was done too, to show the value of the dollar and what you're getting in return. I think that's a really important, but like you say, counselors zero in on that right away.
Yeah, and Sandy, really, before I did my speech, I had been looking, doing the research, looking for your strategic plan, checking for all these things. And I had been looking on your website at the budget. And I could see, just looking at the budget, where the library stood. So we are in, they call us part of culture. And it was at the bottom, below cemeteries. And I thought, really? Look, come on. This has got to change. They don't understand what we do. So that's my speech got based on what we do.
Yes, you were just saying it should be in community services rather than in
yes,
culture.
I really like that. That's much better place for it.
So that's something I'm going to take back as well. From
yes.
I think that's it.
We're
Well
short.
done. Well done, both of you. That is so great to hear such a terrific success story and how you turned around the council's perceptions of libraries from a negative below cemeteries. Wow.
Yes, yeah.
You know, to making it a top priority such that the mayor felt compelled to speak to the minister about libraries. I mean, that is such a change, and well done to you both for the work that you've done, and Gloria, with your presentation to council, really outlining it's the impact that people want to know about, because everybody's coming to council with numbers, right? Number.
Mhm.
And honestly, if you were to look at library budgets, I mean, transportation departments spend that in January, right? They're small numbers, so you're not going to have the impact that some of the other pressures facing municipalities have. And so, you know, if you're trying to compete on numbers, you're not going to be there. But what you can do is compete on impact, and you can talk about the value that libraries bring to the community with, as the folks from Old said, with either new residents, new Canadians, or seniors. Like, you need to touch on the whole demographic in your community to make sure that you are, you know, your stories are resonating. But it really is the difference that it makes. And I'm going to tell a real quick story, because this really resonated for me. About 20 years ago, I heard Stephen Lewis speak at a conference, and Stephen Lewis at the time was the UN chief in charge of dealing with the AIDS pandemic in sub-Saharan Africa. So there was an AIDS epidemic that had gone through sub-Saharan Africa. It wiped out the entire generation of adults. So you were left with grandparents and children. The AIDS pandemic in several countries just wiped out that middle generation. And so he was telling a story, and he was talking about, initially he started with the numbers. This many people have died. This many people have contracted AIDS. This, you know, populations and numbers. And I can't remember those numbers. They're just not a memorable thing. But he went on to tell a story about when he was in a community in Africa, and he had come across a group of grandmothers who were selling cabbages in the town at a market, at a farmer's market. And Stephen Lewis went up to them and said, "Oh my goodness, you know, you've got a lot of cabbages here. Looks like you're going to make some good money today. What do you do with the money that you make?" And they responded by saying, "We buy coffins. There's never enough coffins," because that generation was dying. And 20 years later, I still remember the story like I heard it yesterday. I have no idea what the numbers are. So when you can tell a really good story, and when it can really sort of hit home for people, those stories become memorable and they become repeatable, which is what you want. You want the mayor to go to the minister and repeat a memorable story, because that then passes on that impact. Number. Nobody but the accountants in the world remember numbers. What really makes a difference for people are those stories that have that sort of gut, oh my gosh, kind of impact. Turn your mic on, and Sandy. Yeah. You want to say something about that? Yeah.
No, sorry, I was just making a comment that the story about talking to his mother really, I will never forget that part, and there's many more. So I was just saying, yeah, that's why that story hit me. Sorry.
100%. And because we're all human beings, right? We're all people. The reason that road maintenance gets such attention in municipalities is because everybody's got a story. I slid off the road because the gravel was too thick. There's no dust mitigation. I can't see where I'm going. You know, everybody's got a story, and they're loud. They're loud about their stories. So it gets a lot of attention. Libraries need to be equally loud about the impacts that they have on everyday people every day in the community and how they help. And so that's where that document that we sent a link through in the chat, and we will mail out to you. We pulled some key themes around things like economic development or education, because we know that those stories are relatable, and we know that most libraries have something they can contribute to that. So the resume writing programs, job training, applying for a job using the public computers, that all supports economic development. So, it's just a matter of being strategic about your stories. If you know what the municipal priorities are, make sure that your stories reflect things that are important to the municipality and helping it achieve its goals. And I see be sure to thank them for the funding. Yes, that's really important. To your earlier point, I think, Sandy, you had said something about everybody's coming asking for money all the time or complaining they don't have enough. So it'd be really refreshing, I think, as a counselor, if someone said, gee, thanks for the funding you've been giving us all these years. It's been put to good use. That's a really good point. Really good point. And then how do you tell your stories to council? I'd love to do the same thing when I present, but I'm worried about losing them when I talk about the library. What if they view those stories as irrelevant? Gloria, do you want to speak to this with your experience?
Well, I think I made them short. And I based them on a service. I don't think there's any magic in it. Yeah, I can share a little bit about, what I did. If anybody's interested, I'd send it to them. You can use it as a bit of an example.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful. If you're able to share just how you hone it in, because you're right, you can't go back to the beginning of time and talk about the first stone tablet that was ever etched and then get finally to your point. I think folks, actually, do you have anything you can share with us now as to how you develop those stories? I think I'd be interested in that.
Your speed. Well, I won't. I'll just.
I talked that we were just coming out of the pandemic, so I just used so maybe this is a story time. Arriving in masks, children, parents, and grandparents arrived for the program. The demand being much higher than we assumed it would be, we had 4 classes each week to accommodate everyone. The program was a giant test for the library and its new space. We learned how to block the children's area with chairs to stop sprinters from running down the aisles. We learned how to turn off the actuators on the newly accessible doors that town council had just had installed in the library so that the kids could not pin each other between them when they all fought to push the button. We learned that it's impossible to socially distance toddlers, and we also learned that if you were born during a pandemic, you would be 2 years of age. You could be 2 years of age and have never played with another child before this, your first visit to the library. I don't know. It was
showed on and on. It had humor. It touched the heart. It also listed all the things. She's got 3 pages, but it was quick. It was paced quickly. So there wasn't a long story, but we heard all the different things and everyone was just gobsmacked. Like, oh my gosh, that you've done all this, just you and your staff. And how many do you have? 2 people?
It's myself and one other, yeah.
Yeah, there's 2 people doing all these things, helping people do resumes, helping people, and it just went on. And it was just, she had us in her hand. She could have done whatever she wanted.
That's brilliant. That is brilliant. And I think it is just that simple. It needs to be relatable. It needs to be funny. I love the idea about you learned that you couldn't socially distance toddlers. That's hilarious. Just anything that people can relate to, but also illustrates the humanity of libraries and the humanity of bringing people together in any kind of a situation. And certainly post-pandemic, I'm certain there were lots of those stories. Now we need to talk, I think, about the transition. There's a lot of people who work from home, so the library becomes their social hub as well as a learning place. Kids are homeschooled as well in many cases. So again, it becomes that social environment where they learn, as you pointed out, if you were born, as my youngest grandson was, he's a pandemic baby. He was born at the start of the pandemic. And it was 2 years before he was around anybody besides his older brother. And so, reminding people of these things and reminding them about the fact that human beings are social beings and they need to be around other people and they need to be around other circumstances, I think is really important. And I'm going to stop blathering now. Leslie, yeah.
I was just going to add that using what your patrons say to you is a great example or a great way to work that into the conversation. So, for example, we have one patron that has said to us how wonderful it is to come into an environment where there's no expectation of purchasing anything in order to be. So, that is one thing that as a library we have that people in the community need. And so, just telling that story by saying, actually, I had a patron the other day that said this to me. Often I'll also take quotes right from our surveys because we always do tell us how we're doing, surveys, those types of things. And you'll get quotes from patrons of things that they like that you're doing well. Just take that quote and put it right in there. You don't have to, I always just say patron survey XYZ. I don't put their names on it or anything like that, but it's just a way of saying, this is what the community is saying about us, and let the patrons tell the story by just letting the council know what they're saying.
Yeah, such a good point. Such a good point. I think that it doesn't have to be hard or complicated, as you've said. I think the other thing that you can point out, because we are seeing a lot of this in a lot of communities, is that libraries are also a safe space. You know, there aren't a lot of places, even at the mall or a shopping area, you know, kids gather and sometimes they get into trouble. I mean, a library is a safe space, and it's a place that parents can trust. If their, you know, 12-year-old is going to the library with some friends, they know that it's going to be a safe space. So yeah, there's lots of things that you can talk about that libraries bring that just don't exist elsewhere. Yeah, Sandy, Gloria.
I have a story about that as well that you just tweaked. I was a school teacher, I'm retired, but when I subbed at our school, there were certain students that were always at the office. And you know, they have to be at the office. And when I came to the library in the summer, doing some things with Gloria, those same students were sitting at computers in the library. And I had to make the comment at the end, do you not have problems with those students? Like, their problems at school? They had no idea. They were polite. They were in a safe space. Some of them came from homes that were not safe in the summer. They spent all day. As a matter of fact, they weren't eating. So Gloria brought in fruit and they started bringing in bars and stuff. So they at least had something to eat. And I was amazed at how they felt so safe at the library. Where in school, they were not popular at all. Mm-hmm. Here, they were popular and well-behaved and polite. It was incredible. Because they wanted to be here, and they were treated with respect, and so they gave it back. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great story. I think you're right. I think that you know, a lot of counselors sometimes, or just people in the community, think that everybody has, you know, an apple pie home life, and lots of kids don't. And so they do need a place to go where they can feel safe, supported, they can hang with their friends, and they can just sort of relax, because maybe their home life is chaotic. And so again, reminding people about that, it can be really powerful as well. Yeah, for sure. Are there any other questions or comments that people have for this esteemed panel, Gloria and Sandy and Leslie and Shauna? These are folks who have, you know, they're on the ground doing this like you are, and have some successes to share. Anybody have any other questions they want to ask? No? Hailey, perhaps we do have just a few minutes here. I can go through the template that we created last year. Happy to make it available to folks in the Parkland Regional Library System, because this, I think, was only shared last year with YRL. So simple little template that we created, and it's pretty self-explanatory. So if you want this, just let us know, or we can absolutely just send it out to everyone who attended. So this is the front slide. If you can change, Hailey. Yeah, so just a real brief explanation that the library is part of Yellowhead Regional Library. We created this graphic last year about how libraries are community hubs. And this can be a really great place to talk about all the things that libraries do. So there's materials to enjoy, job and skill training, collections and events, social connections and access, reading, writing, understanding, health and wellness resources, local workshops and programs. Like this is sort of a wraparound of how libraries are community hubs. And again, this is branded with the YRL branding, but you know, it can easily be, you just remove the YRL branding in the center. But we really felt this was a great place to start, to say that's part of a bigger system, and that system helps make a lot more resources available to especially smaller communities that couldn't otherwise afford to have them. So just positioning it there. Hailey? Yeah, so the first thing you want to do is go, and you can see that we're just talk briefly about your last year results. So this should just be some brief information about the highlights. And if you can flip to the next slide, please, Hailey. When you're using statistics, make sure that you're giving context to them, because sometimes we throw numbers out. You know, we circulated 300,000 materials. Is that a lot? Is that a little? I don't know. So there's no context for people who are not involved with libraries. And I think that that's really important. So you can talk about the number of library cards you have currently, and is it trending up or down, number of items borrowed, programs offered, that kind of thing. But give it context. Say, just so that you know, you know, there's a population of 2,000 people and we have 500 library cards. So as a percentage of the population, we've got so many people, or whatever. Just give it some context. The number on its own doesn't always work. And thanks, Joy. Appreciate the shout out from last year from this very presentation. And then again, the stories. So when you're telling something about a statistic, give a story behind it. Next slide, please. Then you can talk about your go forward plans. So you can see that numbers haven't been updated in the template, should say 2024, but that's okay. So you can, and on a title slide, as you're introducing the topic, you should put up things like, our library supports education, employment, economic development, and much more, or whatever is the municipal goal, is a great place to pop in there. Next slide. And then just outline your plan of service. And we find that when you can use a graphic or some sort of a chart to show, it's really more digestible for people than to insert a lot of text. So if you can talk about your plan of service with a diagram of some sort, that would be fabulous. But if not, for sure, just outline your top line goals and how you intend to achieve them for the year. And then this is also a great place to say why this is a goal for you, because it's based on community demand, or we've got new populations that are arriving, so we need to support them, or whatever. So it's a great place to put in your plan of service. Next slide. Supporting municipal priorities. So we really want to emphasize this, because I think it's really important that that municipalities know there's a reason that they help fund libraries. Libraries, in fact, help support the community to get where it wants to be, whether that's their 5-year strat plan or it's a long-term vision that the council has adopted for the community. Libraries can help get you there. And so the fact that libraries are that community hub that brings people together, offers social and learning opportunities, and just gives people the resources they need to live, you know, fulfilled lives is a really important message. Next slide. Thanks. So your name library, X library, supports municipal priorities. And what I like to do here is actually set up a A/B chart. So on the one side, you say, here's the municipal goal, and here's how libraries meet the goal. So it's like super clear. Goal is around attracting residents to live in the community. Library supports that by offering programs that people want, that help them choose the community because it offers a higher quality of life, those kinds of things. So itemize the municipal goals and right beside it, put how the library helps the municipality meet those goals. It's a really hard thing to refute once you see it right in front of you. Next slide. Libraries agree that, residents agree that libraries are important. This is where you can insert some of the quotes as Leslie and Shauna were talking about, and certainly Gloria and Sandy were saying. We also did some research earlier this year that I can send to the group, province-wide survey that showed, I think it was 82% of Albertans value libraries. This number is not going to be shocking to anybody, but we do have statistically valid research that you can use, and we can send that out to you, cite the source and the whole bit. Just to reinforce this notion that it's not just the library community that's saying libraries are important. That can be seem a little self-serving. I think libraries are the most important thing in the world. Well, yes, you're a librarian, you would say that. Instead, talk about how other people are saying how important the library is, and we can draw on that research that we did earlier this year. Next slide. So again, when you're talking about your budget requirements, outline what your budget requirements are. Link any increases to supporting those municipal priorities. Know your numbers. Close with a strong ask. It's just a really good capsule. In here, I wouldn't do a line by line of your budget as Leslie and Shauna were saying, but rather if you could organize it by themes. So we're seeing an increase in demand for books in other languages. That's a theme. And therefore we need additional funds, rather than here's how much it is for power and here's how much it is for janitorial. And like, they don't need the line by line. Talk instead about themes and different initiatives that you want to put into place because the community demand is there. Next slide. And then you just close. Here's your library. So you should be able to get through your presentation with like a handful of slides, which again, any counselor I'm sure is always appreciative of brevity when you're making a presentation. Because after you've made your presentation, of course, they're going to want to get into the nuts and bolts with you, and they're going to have their own questions. But if the presentation goes too long, you eat up too much of the time that's available for this topic. And then what happens is their questions go unanswered. They may feel frustrated, or they may feel like they were left wanting. And so try and keep your presentation succinct, but talk about some of the things that we've already discussed here today. So we can absolutely make this template available to folks. Feel free to customize it as you wish. I do like to add a lot of pictures into presentations, or things that really help to illustrate things rather than a bunch of words, because I feel like people get more captivated by that. If you've got a really cool picture of a program that you've offered, it would be fabulous if the counselor said, tell me what's going on in that picture because it looks really cool, right? Like that's the kind of thing you want to look for. You want to look for some really great images and graphics that you can include in your presentation to really illustrate the impact of your work. So yeah, so that presentation template's available. We'll get that out to you as well as the other documents we talked about. Any questions or comments on this template?
We have a question from Alyssa saying that she'll get 10 minutes at a council meeting, and how can she prioritize the information and fit it all in?
100%. So I have this little diagram that I've used where it's like a triangle, and how much you can say is dependent on how much time you have. So if you have like the tip of the inverted pyramid, you have 10 minutes, then you really need to home in on your key messages and get right to the point. You may not have an opportunity to tell a lot of stories. Try and tell one story in 10 minutes as well as your key messages. The more time you have, of course, the more detail you can offer, but it's rare that a council will give you like a half day or something. So, I think we're always in that position of having to be brief. Any other questions about anything we've talked about today?
I just wanted to add one more thing, that council loves it when the library invites them down for pizza to the library and coffee. And then we come and because there's food, and then they show us the library.
Yeah, yeah, that's worked good too.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think getting counselors into your library is really a key strategy. They need to go there. Some haven't been to a library since they left, elementary school, for heaven's sake. And that's like really sad. So they need to go and have a look around because they've got these old-fashioned misconceptions about what libraries are. There's not a lot of librarians with their hair back in a bun going shh, like all of the stereotypical images show. So you need to show them what today's libraries are about and why they're so relevant, and why just because we have the internet doesn't mean you no longer need libraries. I think it's all very important stuff. It all goes to laying the foundation of understanding about what you do, so that when you do come forward with money, they go, oh yeah, I remember I was at the library and this happened or that happened, right? Any other comments? Anybody? Panelists, anything else you want to add? Hailey, I think we're at our conclusion. You want to wrap it up?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you so much to Leslie and Shauna, and to Gloria and Sandy. We so appreciate your experiences and your stories, and kind of relaying the real stuff to our audience. So we will definitely follow up with everybody. We'll send out the recording and all of the resources that we've chatted about today. You should see that later this week. Thank you so much, and have an amazing rest of your day and rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone. Good luck.